My name is Richard Ralston from Americans for Free Choice in Medicine. We would like to welcome everyone who's attending here at the National Press Club, and also everyone who's watching on a live video webcast. On behalf of Americans for Free Choice in Medicine and our co-sponsor, the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, and the other participating organizations, the Ayn Rand Institute, Patients for Stem Cells, and the Pacific Research Institute. I'd also like to acknowledge Jeremy Snavely from APPS, who is instrumental in keeping this organized for me, or with me. I don't expect that all of these organizations will agree on every detail of healthcare or any other public policy, but we come together in a common concern about the growing threat of the Food and Drug Administration over all of the practice of medicine. Our 4 presentations will be followed by a discussion during which our speakers may ask questions of each other, and then we will take questions from the audience. There will be no formal breaks. We want to keep this moving right along. My guess is that this will end sometime between 8 and 8:30. There are beverages outside, so at any time you like, feel free to get something. I just want for 2 or 3 minutes to set a little context for our expert speakers. This is from an editorial or an op-ed published in the Orange County Register last Friday, the title of which is direct: "The Power of the FDA Must End." The Food and Drug Administration is a huge, unwieldy, distant, and indifferent bureaucracy. After more than a century of regulation, it follows a well-established pattern in the history of the U.S. government. It relentlessly, voraciously, and persistently seeks to increase its own spending, regulations, authority, and staff, and offices, and furnitures, and lab. The result is the subordination of the best interests of patients in favor of serving the FDA's congressional and ideological patrons. The unstated principles behind the FDA's use of this naked government power include: 1. No drug or medical equipment may be manufactured without government permission. No physician may provide treatment to a patient without government permission. That was 2. 3. No terminally ill patient may have access to drugs without government permission. 4. Nothing from a patient's body, such as stem cells, may be removed and used in their own treatment without government permission. 5. No treatment approved for one purpose, if found effective for another purpose, may be used for the latter without government permission. 6. No knowledge, technical skills, or experience may be applied by medical specialists without permission of FDA officials, whether those officials possess such qualifications or not. The ignorance of the government must always trump the experience of those actually practicing medicine. 7. No treatment found to be safe and effective in Europe, Japan, or anywhere else is permitted if not FDA approved. In essence, no physician may continue to practice medicine, and no American may live without government permission. Our first speaker tonight is Dr. Jane M. Orient. She obtained her undergraduate degrees in chemistry and mathematics from the University of Arizona in Tucson and her MD from Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons in 1974. She completed an internal medicine residency at Parkland Memorial Hospital and University of Arizona affiliated hospitals, and then became an instructor at the University of Arizona College of Medicine. She has been in solo private practice since 1981 and has served as executive director of the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, APS, since 1989. She is the author of Your Doctor Is Not In, Healthy Skepticism About National Health Care, Sutton's Law, a novel about where the money is in medicine today, and the second through fourth editions of Sapira's Art and Science of Bedside Diagnosis. More than 100 of her papers have been published in the scientific and popular literature on a variety of subjects, including risk assessment, natural and technological hazards and non-hazards, and medical economics and ethics. She is the editor of APS News and is the managing editor of the Journal of American Physicians and Surgeons. Please help me welcome Dr. Orion.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you for setting up this conference. Between the years of 1932 and 1972, the United States government, that is to say the United States Public Health Service, denied medical care to some 400 American patients. This was the famous Tuskegee experiment that used as experimental subjects some 400 poor black sharecroppers with syphilis near Macon, Georgia. Initially, the study might have made some sense. They wanted to find out about the natural history of syphilis, and there wasn't any really good treatment at the time. But in the 1950s, penicillin became available, and these patients were lied to, and they were deliberately prevented from obtaining any penicillin or other treatment for their condition. Many of them died with the ravages of tertiary syphilis. Many of them infected their wives and their babies. In 1972, there was quite a scandal about this, and a stop was put to the experiment, finally. And a lot of new rules and regulations and institutional review boards were set up to attempt to protect experimental subjects from unethical medical research. Well, now what do you think? Do you think that at the present time, the United States government would never, ever again prevent Americans from getting medical treatment? On the contrary. The institutional review boards that were set up as a result of this censor tens of thousands of research proposals every year, and they may keep many of them from ever being tried in the first place. The FDA rules for approving new drugs are such that had they been in effect in the 1940s, none of us might have penicillin, or even aspirin, perhaps. We may congratulate ourselves on having great medical advances in the United States, but we urgently need new drugs. I'm sure you've heard of MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staph aureus, that plagues our hospitals, and other resistant bacteria. There's multiple drug-resistant tuberculosis, and most of our antimalarials are also losing their effectiveness. I attended recently a program at the Pima County Medical Society by an infectious disease specialist from our university who talked about new antibiotics, and she went through a whole hour of drugs with unpronounceable names, extreme expense, and significant toxicity that are also losing their effectiveness, and they're all third or fourth or fifth generation of the same antibiotics that we have had all along. So I asked her, well, what about peptide antibiotics? That just happens to be something I know about because I was acquainted with the late Bruce Merrifield. Peptide antibiotics are very common in nature. They're made by insects, and they have this interesting mode of action in which they drill a little hole through the cell membrane or wall of the bacteria, and all of the vital elements leak out of the bacterium. Now, Bruce Merrifield won a Nobel Prize in Chemistry for solid-phase protein synthesis, so he could easily synthesize long peptides or amino acids. And I have a list of some 54 papers that he published in the 1980s and the 1990s concerning these antibiotics. You can make them out of D-amino acids, and if you need a little biochemistry review, amino acids come in two forms, left-handed and right-handed, and the one is a mirror image of the other. And all living organisms are made of L-amino acids. Well, Merrifield concocted D-amino acids and found that they had the same effect on things like Staph aureus, tuberculosis, Falciparum malaria, and a whole bunch of other bacteria that are really plaguing us with their resistance. Well, wouldn't this be wonderful? We have all of this research already available. I asked the speaker about it. She didn't know about it. Hardly anybody knows about it. But look, we've got this wealth of information already. Isn't that great? Maybe it's not so great because this is published in the open literature. And this means that it may be impossible to patent it. And this means that the drug companies can't make a huge profit from it. It's not just that they need a profit. Every business needs to make a profit, but they need to make a huge profit in order to pay for the cost of FDA regulations to get something approved. And the cost of FDA approval has gone up 23% recently. It's been going up and up and up, and now is nearly $1 billion to put a new drug on the market. How does all that paperwork help us? It certainly prevents many new drugs from coming to market. The effect of the FDA can squelch medical treatment by just banning it or not making it available or making research impossible to do, but can also do that simply by increasing the cost to unaffordable levels. There was an article published in a newspaper in Arizona about a hospital in Chandler that charged a woman $80,000 for spending a couple of hours in the emergency room after she had a scorpion bite. She received 2 doses of scorpion antivenin that was manufactured in Mexico by a small biotechnology company. It's a good product. The company's been making it for decades, and it costs about $100 in Mexico. A little company in Tennessee did a lot of very expensive studies and got the FDA rights for exclusive distribution of Anascorp in the United States. It's like a beer distributor. It doesn't make it. It's still made in Mexico, but it distributes it. And the cost, instead of being $100, is $3,750 per dose. So the FDA regulations multiplied the cost by about 30, and then the hospital multiplied it again by about 10 to come up with this absolutely outrageous hospital bill. Another example is something is called 17-alpha-hydroxyprogesterone. This is a compound that is used to prevent premature births. And compounding pharmacies have been making it quite safely and successfully and charging about $15 a dose. So to maintain a pregnancy might cost about $300. Well, there's now a drug that's approved by the FDA that's manufactured by a big manufacturer. They charge $300 a dose. I'm sorry, they charge $690 a dose. So instead of costing $300 to maintain a pregnancy, it costs more like $14,000 to keep a premature baby from being born. And now the Congress is considering a bill, S-959, which is about safety and compounding pharmacy. And the pretext for this is, of course, our safety. Our government is watching out for us. And there were cases of fungal meningitis caused by contamination of a supposedly sterile product made by a New England compounding pharmacy. Yes, there were casualties. The FDA can show us the bodies. Say, we're going to protect you against this. And so they propose, this is a great opportunity to introduce in Congress a bill that goes far, far beyond the problem that is used as the justification for it. And you won't see the bodies of people who won't get their medicines, either because they don't exist or because they're just too much to be affordable. Of course, we never see any contamination in drugs made by companies regulated by the FDA, do we? Well, actually we do, especially if they're manufactured in China, where the FDA can't even get into the factory, although it goes to visit about once every 10 years and can go outside the factory and write down what the Chinese government officials tell them. The FDA really wants to shut down compounding pharmacies because they compete with the big drug manufacturers, and to put on them regulations that if you're a billion-dollar company, you can meet, but if you're a little compounder, you really can't. And a lot of physicians rely on these little pharmacies not just to make individualized products, but to help out if there are shortages. And there are shortages because the FDA shuts down a factory because of some little problem. We now in the United States have a shortage of some 300 drugs. Some really simple things like sodium bicarbonate or calcium chloride or anesthetics that are critical in doing surgery. We also find that drugs that I used very commonly when I was at the VA, like quinine and colchicine, which were very inexpensive, you can get, but only in a special preparation that costs probably 50 times as much as the drugs that we used when I was a resident, and they aren't any better now. Interestingly, one hospital in ambulatory surgery center in Oklahoma was severely damaged by hail. The roof was destroyed. They had to gut the whole building and rebuild it, and they did it in 2 weeks. But if there's a little problem with an FDA production line, it can take years to get it fixed after you get all the government approvals. And then I think Mr. Ralston also told you about the problem of off-label uses of drugs. Drugs are useful for many purposes other than the ones for which they're approved. The companies may not go to the expense of getting additional approved indication, but physicians may use them. In fact, probably the majority of drugs that you are prescribed are for an off-label indication. We'd have probably nothing to treat you with if it weren't for this. But the FDA quite aggressively constrains free speech and can threaten with huge fines or putting people in prison if the drug company were to dare communicate to a physician information about perfectly legitimate published studies about the off-label uses of these drugs. I mean, some of these I think are very important, and doctors are really afraid, like intravenous vitamin C in high doses has been shown to save people who were at death's door from influenza, and there's really nothing else that can help them, but doctors are afraid to use it. Even oxygen under pressure, doctors are afraid to use, even though it has been shown to be of great benefits in many neurological conditions. Then there are criminal penalties, very severe criminal penalties. You've probably heard the story about Dr. Brzezinski in Texas, who thought up a new drug called anti-neoplastons, and the FDA aggressively prosecuted him criminally, tried to throw him into federal prison because he was saving the lives of children with an otherwise untreatable brain cancer or some other form of cancer who had already failed on a lot of other very expensive, toxic, and ineffective methods of treatment. I think the only reason he's not in federal prison now is because his patients stormed the courtroom, and even the government was embarrassed at what they were trying to do. Now, the FDA is forbidden to interfere in the practice of medicine, but it just keeps redefining the practice of medicine. Or it redefines what a compounding pharmacy that tries to make it all is to be manufacturing. Or, and I think the next speaker will talk about adult stem cells, if you take out a patient's own stem cells and manipulate them in some way, you are manufacturing. So you're supposed to be subject to all the regulations that a huge drug company would be subject to. Even surgical procedures, like another treatment for multiple sclerosis that's been proposed, is to dilate veins that have obstructions in them using venous balloons going up into a vein that's used hundreds of times in cath labs throughout the country, probably every day, for other procedures. But it's not been approved for use in MS. I mean, this is something you can see on the X-ray. There's an obstruction, you relieve the obstruction, you did something. And the FDA threatened, and I think probably shut down, a registry in Southern California that was attempting to follow up patients who had had this procedure to see whether or not it did any good. But because it wasn't the sort of double-blind controlled study that the FDA prefers, which is very difficult to do with surgical procedures, for example, one like this, then they don't want the information to come out at all. So the FDA is involved in our lives in many, many ways by suppressing freedom of speech, by cutting off research altogether, by increasing costs beyond the ability to afford them. And I think that we are all going to be affected by this regime. Now, in 1972, when we deprived 400 sharecroppers of treatment for syphilis, what do you call that? Immoral? Unethical? Inhumane? Outrageous? Atrocious? But when the U.S. government is doing that now to 300 million Americans as a matter of routine, what do you call that?
Thank you. Rituparna Basu writes and speaks on healthcare policy issues for the Ayn Rand Institute, based in Irvine, California. Her work has appeared in such venues as Forbes, Town Hall, and the Daily Caller. She blogs at The Voice for Reason, is a regular guest on radio, and speaks frequently at college campuses across America. Please welcome Rituparna Basu.
Thank you, Richard. Can everyone hear me? Okay. I want to focus my comments today on the particular kind of control that the FDA exerts over the medical market. And I want to discuss whether this kind of control, this type of regulation, whether it's appropriate or not. What the FDA does is exercise preventive law, preventive measures. It prevents drug companies, medical device makers, and now even people who come up with medical procedures like stem cell therapies, which we'll learn about. But it prevents all of these people from selling their products, selling their services, until the government gives them approval. Nobody is allowed to enter the medical market without the government's permission. You could be the top drug manufacturer in the world, have a proven track record of producing only the best medicines. But even you have to go through the FDA review process for every new drug you produce. So you need to get this permission. And this permission can be costly. It can cost more than $1 billion. It can take a lot of time. It could take 15 years, maybe more. Dr. Orient discussed some of the other consequences. But what it is a trial of sorts. The drug companies, the medical device manufacturers, they have to prove to the government that their product is not going to hurt anyone, that it's safe, and that it is not snake oil, that it is achieving what it's intended to achieve, that it's effective. Now, is this appropriate? Is it warranted to require all medical companies to prove themselves to the government before being allowed to sell their products? This is what I'd like to discuss. So to answer this question, well, is it warranted? It's helpful to think about, well, why do we have these regulations right now? Why is it considered necessary? Now, the necessary assumption, I think, if we're going to say, well, medical companies have to justify the validity of their products to the government, right, before they can be sold. The assumption is that, well, without the FDA, medical companies can't be trusted to produce high-quality products on their own. That's why we need the government involved to ensure this. Now, why can't they be trusted? Why can't they be trusted to produce good products on their own? I think the conventional view goes something like this. People think, well, what are these guys after? What's their motive? What do they want? I'm talking about the drug companies, the medical device manufacturers. people who come up with new medical procedures. Well, we know they're after money, right? They're after our money. They're profit-seeking entities. And right away, that's something that people get a little bit uncomfortable with, right? I mean, we associate that goal to make money with certain undesirable behaviors, and indeed, behaviors that could potentially cause us serious harm. So we think about things like, well, for the sake of their bottom line, what might a company do? Maybe it'll think, yeah, I should cut a few corners. Maybe skip a test here, skip a test there. Maybe because it's too expensive or they have a deadline that they need to meet. Maybe not test the effectiveness of a drug as much as they otherwise would because it's too costly, we'll make more money if we don't do this. So we see that they have an eye on making money. And this seems to not necessarily be aligned with having an eye on us, on the customer, on the consumer, on the patient, about what's good for us. And maybe they don't discount it fully, but it seems like when it comes to making money versus us, maybe our safety is secondary. And this is a very serious issue. I mean, people have this view about profit seeking all across the economy. But in healthcare, in medicine, it's particularly serious, right? Because if someone sells you, for example, a phony electronics product, you might lose some time, you might be very annoyed, you might hurt a little bit financially. But of course, in medicine, if something like that happens, not only does all that stuff happen, but you could also do serious harm to yourself. So for example, how is this playing out today? Dr. Orient talked about compounding pharmacies. So these are pharmacies that specialize in preparing tailored drugs for you that are not otherwise sold. So for example, if you're allergic to a certain inactive ingredient in a pill, well, the compounding pharmacy can maybe make you the same pill, but switch out that ingredient that you're allergic to. Or if you can't swallow a pill, they might make it for you in liquid form. So basically, they're an alternative to standard drugs that are out there. They can customize a little bit for you. Now, these pharmacies used to be, and still are, under state control. But now the federal government, the FDA, wants to be involved. Presumably because the FDA can, being a federal agency, impose more rigorous and uniform oversight. So why do they say compounding pharmacies, why do they need to be subjected to this kind of oversight? Well, in the last decade or so, they've really grown. They used to be seen as small mom and pop shops. And now, what are they? Well, as an editorial in USA Today put it, they're, quote, acting like manufacturers, envisioning themselves making big profits. So once profits become the focus, that's when it's considered a problem. It invokes in people's minds cutting corners, sacrificing the quality of the product you're creating, even putting customers in harm's way potentially, just for the sake of financial gain. And on this view, yes, we need the government, right? We need the government to actively prevent these companies from doing something that they clearly see as in their interest to do. Now, I think this is a very incomplete examination of what seeking profit really entails. Though I think this is the kind of examination that is given today, but I think it deserves further thought. In reality, the fact that somebody wants to make money, that makes us uncomfortable. But I don't think by itself suggests what kind of behavior you're going to engage in. I don't think by itself wanting to make money suggests that you are going to engage in questionable behavior, morally questionable behavior, legally questionable behavior. I think the necessary question to ask is, well, how? How does a company who wants to make money, how do they want to make it? What do they want to do? What do they see as really in their interest to making money? And this is not, I don't think, an easy question, and it's not an obvious question. Now, I can think of at least two ways to go about this to make money. There may be more, but I can think of at least 2 ways right now. So there's the way that is generally assumed, that the FDA certainly assumes about medical companies, the Bernie Madoff way, if you will. It's your end goal. Your end goal is money. That's what you're after. That's what you ultimately care about. And you don't really care as to what is necessary to achieve that goal. So some people might get hurt. Some patients might get hurt. Oh well. Some people may end up giving a good chunk of their life savings to you because you've led them to believe that you're offering a real value when in fact you're faking a value and you know it. Oh well, sucks to be them. Down the road, people may realize that you're selling snake oil and they won't want to buy from you anymore. Well, you're probably not in it for the long haul if you want to make money this way, right? Selling a medical drug, selling a device may just be a happenstance. Maybe that's just where you think a quick buck can be made. Tomorrow, when some other field comes along that looks profitable, you'll probably jump ship. So for the sake of your bank balance, you're willing to risk everything. Your integrity, other people's lives, everything. Now, if this is what everyone was doing in the medical market, if this is how they were pursuing profit, we would certainly need the FDA to oversee each person, each company, to view everyone very suspiciously, right? To protect us from these people who, if not just psychologically, or if not literally, but psychologically certainly resemble crooks, resemble criminals. So that's one way to make money. But that's not the only way to make money. Another way is not by faking values, but by producing real values, values that people want and they're willing to pay for again and again. Producing, for example, a drug like Lipitor. Lipitor is the best-selling drug in the history of pharmaceuticals. At one point, it was bringing in more than $10 billion a year. The companies that made Lipitor made huge profits, but they did it differently. Now, this way, to create a real value that people love. So Lipitor, if you don't know, it's a cholesterol-lowering drug. And it's very, very effective, and it's been more effective than other statins on the market. It's helped millions of people, hundreds of millions of people. Okay. It's a great drug. And that's how the companies that made Lipitor made their money. Now, this way, the creation of a real value is a lot harder, right? It's a lot harder than the person who just wants to make a quick buck doing whatever is necessary, right? Because it's easy to fake something, but it's really hard to create something that actually works. This way of making money takes longer than the other way. Lipitor took 12 years to get to market. But the companies that produced it, the people who discovered the drug, held out. They thought, yeah, this is good. I want to do this. Trying to create a really valuable product also increases your chances of failure. Because even if you create such a drug, what if doctors don't recognize it as such, right? So the risks are very high. With Lipitor, one of the reasons they were very nervous about it is that they didn't know if doctors would even like it. There were a bunch of statins on the market already. Maybe this one was not going to be shown to be that much better. But still, though the chance of failure was quite large, and it usually is when you're producing a medical drug, they went for it. So what was motivating these kinds of people? What was motivating the people who made Lipitor, who make all of these best-selling drugs? Well, they're after money, too. They want a profit. But they're not after money for the sake of money, right? They're doing what they're doing because they love the doing. They're passionate about figuring this stuff out, about figuring out how to tackle serious medical problems that people face. The science fascinates them. The application fascinates them, but what else this drug could do. And it's not they don't not care about the people around them. They really care about the people around them. That's why they devote their entire lives, all their time, energy, money, to trying to make a drug or a device that offers a really great value to people. And of course, they want to make money. They want to make money to sustain their lives, to maintain a standard of living, but it's not by any means. They want to do it by creating something that they can be proud of, right? Which means producing something that is high quality, that achieves what they want it to achieve. And you can see this if you look at the people who created these drugs. So the gentleman who created Lipitor, he talks about his name is Bruce Roth, and he was fascinated with the statin market. He was fascinated with it as a student. He wanted to make a better drug, and that's what he devoted a good portion of his life to doing. And the profit that you make along the way, that he made along the way, that all these successful drug companies make along the way, well, that's a reflection of the enormous value that they have created. That's why they're after it. They want that money because it reflects how much value they really offered people and how good that value was, that people really saw it as, yes, this is really, really helpful to them. Now, this way of profit making, this way of making money, I would argue is what's really in a person's interest if they want to be successful. Right? I don't think there's any fun in creating a subpar product. I don't think there's any fun in creating a shoddy product. You know it's not that great. You get no benefit from it besides material gain. And we all know life is a lot more than just how much money you have. Right? You want to feel proud of your efforts. You don't want to engage in activities where you're always looking over your shoulder to see, have the authorities found out about me, or have people figured me out? You want to build a solid reputation, especially if you're small. If you're small, reputation is everything. Now, my point is not to argue definitively that this is in your interest. I definitely think it is, but that's a big topic, and I think it deserves more discussion. But the point is that every drug maker, every medical device maker has to ask himself, what kind of business do I want to run? What do I think will really make me, my company, better off? How do I want to make money? Now, this can be a difficult decision for people. There's a lot of factors to consider, and obviously the context in which you're dealing with is going to be, your individual context. But I think it's people are certainly capable of making such decisions, of thinking about these issues. I don't think that people are prone to think short range, to think, the best way for me is to cut corners. I think people can have serious discussions. You can introspect yourself. I can make long range decisions that might seem there might be easier solutions out there to get what I want. But no, I'm looking long range, and I can see certain things are good for me, certain things are not good for me. And I think we see this today in the medical market. I mean, Lipitor is just one drug. I picked it because it's the best-selling drug. But there's so many other drugs out there. There's so many devices that maybe you've used that have radically improved your life and have brought billions to the people who made them. And what I think the story with all of them is the same. What motivates them is their passion for their work. They want to create great products, and they know that cutting corners will just not cut it. If they want to achieve their goal of having a product they can stand by, they're going to make it the best that they can. Now, this kind of view of making money, I don't think it lends itself, or it does not evoke the same sort of fear and the same sort of discomfort as the other view did, right? Of, I'm going to make a quick buck however I can, whatever happens to the people around me, whatever. And in fact, I think this view, and it's something to really think about it, but it makes me very comfortable with what they're trying to do. Because if they have a certain vision of a drug, that this is the kind of impact I want to see in people's lives through this drug, and they're the ones who are brilliant enough and creative enough to create it, I think our interests are very much aligned. Now, the second process that I described, how to make money, I think the people who create the best drugs today, create the best devices, These are the kinds of individuals that they are. And it's these people whose intellect, creativity, and passion is what we owe so many of the life-enhancing, life-saving products, medical products on the market today. So though there are different kinds of ways to make money, some are destructive ways and some are productive ways, the FDA operates on one premise, that you're trying to make money by potentially destroying people's lives. And that is what I think is so particularly heinous about the FDA's preventive controls, that it treats the incredible, brilliant people who've chosen to spend their lives trying to make drugs and devices that radically improve our lives, that it treats them as if they're crooks, views them suspiciously. What are you doing? Treats them as if they have no interest in making good products, that they would do anything for a quick buck. Now, it's true that some people will choose the first route, right? They will think, yeah, I think I'm just going to cut corners when I can. They'll do it. But people can choose. That's the point. You can choose the kind of business you want to run. You can choose the kind of economic activities you want to engage in. Do you want to engage in win-win transactions where you're offering a great value to people, or do you want to fool them, fake a value, try to convince them you're selling them something great, but you're really not? You can choose. And if you can choose, then it's entirely improper for the government to make an assumption about what that choice will be, right? To treat you as if you've made the wrong choice. As citizens of this country, you and I are considered innocent until proven guilty. We don't afford that same right to those who create the medical products that save and enhance our lives. We instead eye each one, very bluntly put, as a psychopath with a lab coat. What's proper, I think, is for the government to go after the people who have demonstrated themselves to be a threat to others, who knowingly, willfully are trying to injure others. But beyond that, I think the FDA's role should be to leave people alone, to view them as innocent until proven guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Ritu. Michael Phelan is a serial entrepreneur who was the CEO and co-founder of SevOne, one of the fastest growing software companies in the world. He recently stepped down because he has MS. Michael will discuss the patient's right to use their own stem cells for potential life-saving therapies. Michael? Welcome, Michael, please.
Thank you. Fall off the edge. Great. First of all, I want to thank the Americans for Free Choice in Medicine and the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons for giving me the opportunity to share our patient's perspective in a drama that involves the FDA denying us access to our own bodies, to our own cells. So imagine you or a loved one, your wife or your husband or your child, is suffering from an illness or an injury, and they can't lead a normal life. and a promising discovery reveals cells in their own bodies or in your body that can stop or limit the suffering, but the FDA forbids doctors to use these cells. I'm honored to represent Patients for Stem Cells organization, which was formed to fight for our right to access our own cells, the right to use our own bodies to heal ourselves. Our mission is to create awareness of how our basic right is being violated. In February, I was interviewed by Forbes magazine, which they titled "One Man's Reluctant Tour for Adult Stem Cells." The interviewer had recently interviewed a so-called stem cell expert, and he was attributing or spreading false information, attributing the risk associated with embryonic stem cell research or induced pluripotent stem cell treatment with adult stem treatment. And so I agreed to be interviewed to correct this misinformation. I used it as an opportunity to explain that this misinformation is aiding the FDA overreach that forced me overseas in the first place for treatment for MS. I'd been in Forbes before. I started and grown successful computer companies, and I've served as CEO and president. In 2006, I co-founded a company called Sev1, which became one of the fastest growing companies in the technology world, I guess in the world. So recently I stepped down primarily due to MS, or MS played a big part in my decision. When I was starting this company in 2006, I started getting horrendous stabbing pains in my neck. At the time, it was diagnosed as Lyme disease. Everyone in my neighborhood had Lyme disease, or every other person did. A half a dozen people had Bell's palsy caused by Lyme disease. I think I wanted it to be Lyme disease, but however, the diagnosis of MS was confirmed within a year. So as I was building my company, I was focused on getting the best care available. So my symptoms started 7 years ago, in my late 40s. I'm 57 now. I have the best neurologist in Philadelphia, first at the University of Pennsylvania, now at Jefferson. I've been on standard FDA-approved drug therapy for 6 years. Unfortunately, these therapies have not been very effective for me. The bottom line is there's no cure for MS. None of the approved drugs stop the disease. Efficacy is measured in how they slow down the disease. So all the standard treatments are 34% or less effective. So I started researching promising trials, clinical trials. I found out the study results from autologous adult stem cell treatments were amazing. They were careful not to call it a cure, but the subject patients were using the word cure. The only way to get this treatment in the U.S. is through an approved FDA study. So I tried to get into the studies in the U.S. The first was stem cell therapy for patients with MS. Bear with me one second here. So pardon me one second, I lost track here. The wonders of technology. I touched the wrong button. Though I've spent my whole career in technology. Anyway, the first study was stem cell therapy for patients with MS, led by Richard Burt in Northwestern. The treatment involves taking bone marrow-derived stem cells, separating and expanding the cells in the lab, and giving them back to me, the patient. Their treatment also involves using chemo to suppress the immune system and then rebooting the patient's immune system with their own stem cells. The clinical trial process is not funded by a pharmaceutical. So there's no repeat business in harvesting my own individual stem cells. So I had to pay approximately $10,000 out of my own pocket to travel to Chicago for the tests, for the hospital charges, and the MRIs. It turned out that I didn't qualify for this trial. Dr. Burt's opinion was that the risk related to aggressive chemo wasn't worth the potential gain because I was in my 50s and the MRI evidence did not confirm enough recent disease activity. Apparently, they get their best results when the disease is in its earlier inflammatory stages, and my stage was questionable. It certainly didn't feel questionable to me. It seemed very active. But anyway, I tried to get into a second U.S. clinical study, autologous mesenchymal stem cell transplantation for MS, headed up by Jeffrey Cohen at the Cleveland Clinic. I didn't qualify for this trial because I was going to be over 55 at the end point. And that was the criteria they submitted to the FDA, was you had to be under 55, and they couldn't change that. So I went to the Stem Cell Institute in Panama and went to a Johns Hopkins managed hospital. And I got a very similar treatment that what they were giving in at the Cleveland Clinic, except they extracted my stem cells from my fat instead of my bone marrow. So they separated they separate and concentrate the cells, and in about a week they give it back to me. Bear with me again here. They gave it back to me in an IV. So I had visual problems for over a year before treatment, including double vision. After my first treatment in May 2012, my vision problems resolved. I was able to continue driving and working. My mental and physical energy improved dramatically, and a number of other problems improved. So I was really pleased with the outcome. So what are the experts saying? Arnold Kaplan, professor of biology and professor of general medicine sciences at Case Western, he said he's considered by many to be the father of mesenchymal stem cells. He refers to their action as hit and run healing. In an October 2012 stem cell summit, he said that there were over 250 MSC trials that are ongoing or completed. However, none of these have led to regulatory approval for widespread use in America or in Europe. And this is the quote I love. He said, if I had MS, I'd probably be getting this therapy. I would be getting this therapy. I'd probably go offshore. So how safe are stem cells? Some financially conflicted scientists have claimed that cultured cells are potentially dangerous. So what data exists to show this? So let's back up and we'll just talk about what are cultured stem cells. So a mesenchymal stem cell is a cell that can become another cell or help repair damaged tissue. From the moment you're conceived to the moment you die, when a cell dies, it breaks open and chemical compounds come out. A cytokine messenger basically is saying, come here and fix me. And that message gets sent through your blood to your bone marrow, and it creates stem cells, and they come back and hone in on the cytokine and repair either they repair, but they also bring with them healing factors or trophic factors that are kind of like a pharmacy of drugs that we've evolved with. So you can take it, you can harvest MSCs from your bone marrow, or you can get them from your fat tissue, your adipose tissue, but it only comes in a small quantity. So when you were 2 years old and skinned your knees, and that whole process started, and the MSCs flooded to repair your skinned knees, some of them got trapped in your fat. And that's what I had done in Panama. And that's what they were doing. That's not what they were doing at Cleveland Clinic, because when they put their study in, they hadn't discovered they could harvest them easy. They could have a better yield from fat than they could get from bone marrow. So if you are supplying or if you're submitting to the FDA, you can't change your study in the midstream, even if you find a better way to do it. In any event, so to get enough stem cells to have an effective dose, they're grown and expanded in culture. So what is the stem cell risk? So the risk of a stem cell therapy generally increases as the sources change. The safest cells are your own adult stem cells. Newer induced pluripotent stem cells manufactured in a lab are artificial and are considered the most dangerous. But embryonic stem cells, as I understand it, become cancer 100% of the time when they're injected into a mammal, unless you do something to them. So if you do something to them, that usually involves something you can patent. If you can patent it, there's a lot of money in it. So hundreds of millions of dollars have gone into research and patents need to be protected. So what's financially at stake for scientists, universities, drug companies, and the FDA? Those crying wolf in the press, spreading misinformation, are conflicted. They are either sponsored by vested financial interests to protect markets, or their research involves patents that could be threatened. There's not a lot of money in using my cells. It's not repeatable, it's not mass produced. So one of the FDA arguments in court, and I'll talk about this in a minute, is that autologous stem cell treatment would depress the market for pharmaceutical companies' products that required expensive studies. Apparently, the FDA sees its role as protecting markets over protecting patients. So if the media surrounding risk is being generated by financially conflicted parties, what's the real risk? In the U.S. National Library of Medicine or the FDA published trials, how many patients have been treated with expanded MSCs without serious complications? Over 2,000 patients in 66 completed trials. So how many patients are currently being treated with stem cell in research studies listed on clinicaltrials.gov? 1,630. So how much is enough? How many drugs have been approved or fast-tracked with significantly less proof? Sir John Gordon, winner of the 2012 Nobel Prize for stem cell research, criticized the FDA in a London press conference saying, "I think patients would be happy to take the risk of using their own stem cells or using their own cells given the chance. But the FDA is placing immense conditions on approval." Recently, in a Harvard Law Bill of Health blog, an article titled "Our Bodies, Our Cells, the FDA Regulation of Autologous Adult Stem Cell Therapies," said that the restrictive FDA regulatory framework, as it exists today, is a significant driver in building stem cell tourism. It makes no sense to deprive patients of autologous therapies because their physicians lack the resources and the patients lack the time to do a drug study the way that like Johnson & Johnson or Merck is required to. It's hard enough for them to do it. So the FDA should re-examine its regulations, especially as applied to physicians treating patients with their own cells. Extracting a patient's cells for subsequent re-injection carries some risk, but so does banking one's own blood or freezing eggs for later use. Dr. Chris Centeno has pioneered this advanced treatment in his orthopedic practice. He harvests MSCs from the patient, he concentrates and expands the cells, and then re-injects them back into the patient's damaged joints. Over 500 patients have been treated with their own cells at his clinic, and the results have been striking. 2/3 report better than 50% relief. 40% report more than 70. Let me pull these up here. I'm reading them without. 40% report more than 75% relief. 2 years after treatment, only 8% opted for knee replacement surgery. Now he's in the middle of a landmark legal case that will shape our medical future. In a 2012 Forbes article named "Stem Cells and the Lawsuit That May Shape Our Future," he said, "We see this lawsuit as a 21st century civil rights issue that will define what control you have over the use of your own cells and tissue. If a loved one is dying in intensive care and a well-done study shows that the patient's own cells can be used to help, does the patient get to decide to use those cells, or is it the decision of the FDA?" So what is the science behind regulating a medical procedure the same as a mass-produced drug? On the left-hand side, you have a manufactured drug. You have a manufacturing facility, multi-state distribution, many prescribing physicians, and many patient outcomes. So one batch of mass-produced cells could make millions sick. On the other side, you have a medical practice. You have one doctor-patient interaction that has one therapeutic action and one outcome. So one procedure is discussed with one patient and who's informed of the risk, and he gives informed consent. So cells taken from one patient and injected back into that same patient is not a public health issue. So surgeons transplant hearts and other body parts, and it's classified as a medical procedure. In vitro fertilization is considered a medical procedure. It involves taking sperm cells from one person, egg cells from another person, and in a lab creating a third person. And it's defined appropriately as a medical procedure. But taking my cells, expanding them in a lab to a therapeutic dose, injecting them back into my body, the FDA classifies as a drug. This makes absolutely no sense. So the question is, are my stem cells a body part, or do they become a drug if they're expanded to a therapeutic dose? This is what the lawsuit, FDA versus Regenerative Sciences, that Chris Centeno is involved in. So patients have to wait for this legal decision. Unfortunately, their disease might not wait. So this is a crime against patients. For me, it's robbery. It robs me of my time and my money. I'm fortunate that I have the resources that I can travel overseas for this treatment. Not everyone does. This crime could cost them their life or the life of the loved ones. And this is way beyond a fairness issue. So our laws do not allow the FDA to be involved in regulating the practice of medicine. In the case U.S. versus Evers, it clearly states if a doctor must prescribe and treat only within federally sanctioned methods, this would result in medical stagnation at the best, as the physician waits for FDA approval. A free, progressive society has an enormous stake in recognizing and protecting this right of the physician. Patients have the biggest stake. So as a New York University law professor, Richard Epstein, explains in a new paper this month for the Manhattan Institute Center of Legal Policy, this federal power grab makes a mockery of the longstanding distinction between the regulation of drugs and medical devices, which fall under the FDA's purview, and the practice of medicine, which has traditionally been regulated by the states. So what needs to happen? Last fall in the Wall Street Journal, Scott Gottlieb, former deputy director of the FDA, urged the FDA to back off and let the adult stem cell treatment field grow in the U.S. So our basic human rights are being violated. Many people are suffering. America should be fast-tracking this treatment, not slowing it down to the process the crawl involved in drug approval. This is my body, and these are my cells. And thank you very much. Let's see if I can get it back to... Great.
Thank you, Mike. It's proof that patient advocates are very important. Sally Pipes has been president and CEO of the Pacific Research Institute since 1991, and from 2010 has also been the Taub Fellow in Healthcare Studies. She's an expert in healthcare policy, but Pacific Research does a lot of other stuff too, particularly in education or California's fascinating political culture. She has published many volumes and 5 books about healthcare, the most recent, The Cure for Obamacare, from Encounter Books, and there are, I noticed some copies outside. Please help me welcome Sally Pipes.
Well, thank you, Richard, and I'd like to thank the Americans for Free Choice in Medicine and the American Association of Physicians and Surgeons for putting on this event. I'm delighted to be here. I'm going to talk about medical innovation in the era of the Affordable Care Act and the FDA. I'll spend a bit of time talking about the Affordable Care Act because it is my passion trying to knock it down. As a former Canadian, I grew up under a single-payer Medicare for all system. So I have great fear about the future of our healthcare system. As all of you know, the 2,700-page Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act was signed into law on March 23, 2010. It was upheld as constitutional by the U.S. Supreme Court with Chief Justice John Roberts' decision. It was also affirmed when President Obama was reelected last November. It's interesting that even today, 57% of Americans would like to see this healthcare law repealed and replaced. Funnily enough, 42% think that it's already been repealed. And of course, on October 1st, the exchanges opened, so-called open for business. There have been a lot of glitches. I've done a lot of media on this. I don't know, how it's all going to end up, but I guess software is software, and you're an expert in software development. I think these glitches will be solved. The big issue will be, will the young people, the young invincibles, people like you, will you decide if you need to purchase insurance in the exchange? Will you sign up? Will you pay for costly coverage? Or will you decide to just let it go? Or will you decide that you will pay that $95 individual mandate penalty or 1% of your income instead? If young people do not sign up for Obamacare, the older and sicker people will be in the exchanges, and as a result, insurance companies are going to be paying out a lot more in claims than they're collecting in premiums, and I think it will be the demise of the insurance industry and ultimately lead us down the path to a Canadian-style single-payer healthcare system. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid made that statement on August 10th in his interview with the PBS. He said we shouldn't be accessing healthcare through insurance companies. He supports a single-payer system. And of course, my Congresswoman from San Francisco, Nancy Pelosi, made that brilliant statement 11 days before the bill was signed into law. We have to pass this bill so that we can find out what's in it. And of course, the American people are finding out what's in it, and I think a lot of people who have had employer-based coverage over the next couple of months are going to be absolutely astounded about what kind of health care they're going to get, what it's going to cost. They won't have access to the same doctors in many cases or the same hospital networks. I think understanding healthcare is similar to unraveling an onion, many layers and many tearful moments. But everyone agrees, all of us want affordable, accessible, quality care. The question is, how do we achieve that goal? And there are two competing visions for healthcare reform. One, which relies on empowering doctors and patients, encouraging innovation in biologics, pharmaceuticals, and medical devices. The other relies on increasing the role of government in our healthcare system through increased mandates, subsidies, taxes, and controls on insurance companies. Remember, the president gave 58 speeches on healthcare before the law was passed, and he ultimately changed from talking about healthcare reform to talking about insurance reform. Nancy Pelosi, of course, said insurance companies are the villain of our lives. So those are the two visions. I support the vision of empowering doctors and patients, not the federal government. How do we, the president had two main goals. One was achieving universal coverage. The other was bending the cost curve down. We are not going to achieve either. The CBO has said that by 2023, there will still be 33 million Americans who are uninsured. 14 million of the uninsured today are people who are already eligible for Medicaid and CHIP and haven't signed up. I believe it's because the reimbursement rates for docs for patients on Medicaid are so low that doctors don't want to take these patients on. And we've seen that under Romney Care in Massachusetts. And the CBO has said under Obamacare, we're going to be adding 8 million to Medicaid, which is down from their original number of 18 million. So we are not going to achieve universal coverage. We are not going to bend that cost curve down. Remember, the president wanted a health care law that cost $900 billion over 10 years. The Congressional Budget Office costed it out $940 billion over 10 years. What's 40? Well, the CBO has recently come out and said the cost of the Affordable Care Act today is already up to $1.8 trillion over 10 years, double what the original estimate was. I believe, and a number of economists believe, that the decade 2014 to 2023, we are looking at about $2.9 trillion over that decade. So we are not bending the cost curve down, and we're not achieving universal coverage. Here in America, we spend about 18% of our gross domestic product on healthcare. No question, it is the highest of any country in the world. We spend about $3 trillion. In Canada, the country I'm from, we spend about 11.4% of gross domestic product because the government is the only supplier of health care in Canada. But what happens? The demand for health care is much greater than the supply. We end up with long waiting lists, ration care, and lack of access to the latest technology and treatments. Today in Canada, the average wait from seeing a primary care doctor to getting treatment by a specialist is 17.8 weeks. That is over 4 months. So let's take a look at the impact of the Affordable Care Act and the FDA on medical innovation in the medical device and pharmaceutical industries. Both of these industries are facing huge tax increases implemented under the Affordable Care Act. For example, on January 1st this year, the 2.3% medical device tax on excise tax on gross sales came into being. There are both members of the Democratic and the Republican Party that would like to see this medical device tax repealed and replaced. The government expects to raise about $29 billion in new taxes over 10 years. But these taxes are going to be passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices. And starting in 2011, there were new excise taxes on drug companies, a $28 billion levy based on sales volume through 2016. So let's look at the impact of these two industries on the American economy. In 2013, the medical device industry's estimated value, $140 billion, and it employs about 400,000 people in this country. Burdening this industry with a 2.3% medical device tax on gross sales is going to result in lost jobs and reduced research and development. It is estimated by AdvaMed that 43,000 jobs are going to be lost because of this tax. For example, Stryker has cut 1,170 jobs, Medtronic 1,000, Welsh Allen 250, Covidien about the same. Our analyst, Dr. Ben Zeiker, has estimated that the industry will scale back investment by 10% through the year 2020. That's about $2 billion per year. Most new medical devices are invested by small venture-backed companies that invest heavily in research and development. They run losses for years before getting FDA approval and turning a profit. The cost of bringing a low-risk medical device from concept to market is around $31 million, of which $24 million of that is related to activities and related to gaining approval from the FDA. The medical technology sector exports about $5.4 billion more than it imports into this country. So it is a huge industry, it is a creator of jobs, but under the Affordable Care Act and with this new tax, the cost of FDA regulation, I think, is going to be a job killer and also a killer of new devices that allow us to live longer and healthier lives. History shows us that an influx of newly insured individuals does not necessarily lead to more revenue for medical device firms. The drug industry is the most research-intensive industry in America. 31 companies belong to pharma, and they spend about $48.5 billion a year on research and development. Since 2000, that industry has spent $500 billion on R&D, yielding 400 new medicines. 1/5 of drug company sales revenue goes towards developing those new drugs. If the federal government continues to take a bite out of revenue through proposed price controls and taxes, the investment in this industry is going to decline significantly as well. That industry supports 4 million jobs in America and accounts for $917 billion of output. And as was mentioned earlier, it takes 10 to 15 years and today $1.2 billion to develop a new drug, secure approval from the FDA, and deliver it to patients. Only 2 in 10 drugs make enough money to recoup their R&D costs. Since 1980, the average life expectancy for cancer patients because of new drugs has increased by 3 years. 83% of this increase is attributable to new drugs. Columbia professor Frank Lichtenberg has shown that for every additional dollar spent on pharmaceuticals, they reduce hospital costs by $3.65. We must create an environment for both of these industries to survive and expand. In 1962, the issue of efficacy was added to the FDA's responsibilities. My mentor, the late, great Milton Friedman, said to me, this was a mistake, but he said he really believed that the FDA would never be removed from the books. He did say, though, he wishes the FDA would remove the term efficacy and only focus on safety. The need for reform of American drug and device approval policy is beyond dispute. All reform should begin with realities supported by the industry. From the polio vaccine to Lipitor, which you spoke about. I just wanted to correct one thing. Lipitor was only developed by Pfizer. They were the Lipitor, not several companies. Lipitor, and it just went off patent last year. So new drugs have helped Americans and others live longer and much healthier lives. These new drugs and devices are products of innovators, not the FDA or other government agencies for that matter. The FDA's regulatory monopoly unduly restricts the ability of Americans to access innovative drugs and devices. Legislators have a number of options before them to break up this regulatory monopoly. All are worthy of serious consideration. Throwing more money at the FDA is highly unlikely to result in more successful outcomes. Many economists, myself included, believe that ultimately, if the Affordable Care Act is not repealed and replaced, America, as I said, will be moving to a single-payer Medicare for all system. And as I said, this was recently reaffirmed when Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid made the statement that the insurance companies should not be the way we access our health care. Such a development, though, if we do move ultimately to that kind of a system, will be devastating for the medical device and drug industries and to us as patients, because we rely on these devices and drugs for allowing us to live longer and healthier lives. We've heard many presentations. They're all very excellent. I believe that the Affordable Care Act cannot be repealed and replaced until after the 2016 election, and then it would only be if the Republicans take the presidency, keep the House, and take back the Senate. Then, early in 2017, this legislation could be repealed and replaced. In my book, The Cure for Obamacare, I talk about a replacement agenda. We need to empower doctors and patients, not the federal government. We need to change the tax code. The federal government got us into this mess during World War II when wage and price controls were in. They gave employers the ability to write off the cost of providing health care for us. We get our health care with pre-tax dollars. If you lose your job, quit your job, go into the individual market, you have to buy your health insurance, health coverage with after-tax dollars. We need to start by leveling the playing field so we can build up competition in our healthcare system. As I say, 60% of Americans today get their health care through their employer, and I believe this is going to change significantly because of the Affordable Care Act. And we're already seeing the Trader Joe's, the Walgreens, the Home Depots, UPS are all making changes. Even though the employer mandate was delayed for a year, they're all making changes to how they provide health care and who they provide it to and what exchanges the people will be put in. So we need to repeal the medical device tax. We need to reform Medicare and Medicaid. We need to allow people to buy insurance across state lines. We need to reform the FDA and make it work for patients and doctors, not government bureaucrats. I believe that universal choice is the key to universal coverage in this country. We do not need more taxes. We don't need more control of our healthcare system by the government. If we do not repeal and replace, America is on the road to serfdom, as the great Friedrich Hayek would say, and there will be no off-ramp. We will be just like people that live in Canada and the UK. Long waiting lists, ration care, and lack of access to the latest technology. As my dear friend P.J. O'Rourke says, if you think healthcare is expensive now, just wait until it's free. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. We'll begin a discussion so our experts can talk to each other, and then go to questions from you. I just had a few observations on the way all this fit together as I was taking notes. And forgive me, I've reached that delightful point where I can't read my own handwriting. Dr. Orient's remarkable history of the account of the outrageous history and current practices of the FDA reflected the outrage that we should all feel for that history and those practices. Another example being sometime go to the website of the Abigail Alliance, which documents the tens or hundreds of thousands of people who have died from being denied access to new drugs which have passed phase 1 safety approval, but not final approval, and for which drug was finally approved after they were dead. The FDA is dedicated to protecting the health of the dead. That's where we've gotten to. Ritupana, you hear all kinds of people talk about or condemn in healthcare, as everywhere else, greed for money. And I've been to FDA advisory meetings when some of the speakers clearly feel that it is better to let people die than allow anyone, anywhere, to make a return on investment from coming up with the cure for that. The stem cell discussion, clearly the FDA feels that your stem cells belong to them. That's obvious. But this ties in to a thread that's consistent with Obamacare. When the government pays for your health care, they quickly start to act as if they own your body, not just the stem cells. And we'll see more of this in not just what if FDA can allow a drug, and the new comparative effectiveness bureaucracies will not allow their use. They will go into these bureaucracies and they will say, unless it treats everyone else the same way, unless everyone can get the same results as you do, you can't have it either. That's the clear direction. And it's going to not only devastate the use of stem cells, but all personalized medicine. Can you imagine the FDA trying to allow or approve therapy that's only applicable to your genetic code, just yours, one at a time? What's that is going to do to medicine? And again, as Sally says, the overlay on what the FDA is doing is very clear in all of Obamacare. Now, I would like to invite any of our speakers who may have found the comments of the other speakers interesting to ask a question. Anyone?
Make one comment.
Okay.
Here. I was very interested in the remarks about embryonic stem cells because it does seem as though the FDA is really just opposed to adult stem cells and would like to thwart them in any way possible. And there is much pressure to permit embryonic stem cell development. And I wondered if some of this is just ideological, or you suggested another reason, and that is that embryonic stem cells might be considerably more profitable because of the patents.
Sure. I think it's clear there have been, as I mentioned before, hundreds of millions of dollars that have been invested in embryonic stem cell research. So we got off track in America because of, say, religious and conflicts where that wasn't the real story. The real story is a money story. There have been hundreds of millions of dollars that have been invested in embryonic stem cell cures. Now, there isn't any. I mean, when I was in Panama, I saw a pilot who had an accident, and he had a compression with his spinal cord, and he couldn't walk anymore. By his second treatment, he was walking. By his third treatment, he was driving, and he has his pilot's license back again. Now, there are embryonic stem cell cures that may be out there 10 years from now that have been invested in. This is available now. Unfortunately, you have to go out of the country to get it. So that is not just a crime against those patients, it's a crime against our economy too. Because healthcare is such a big part of our economy, and if this freight train is coming, I mean, it's happening around the world. So if we artificially stall the freight train in this country so that people like me, as I said before, I can afford it, I'm going to go find it. And so are other people. They're going to find it by giving car washes for John or whoever has to go out of the country. I couldn't really have a car wash for Mike as a CEO. I thought it might get in the paper, but anyway, it's happening now, and I'm seeing it's going to happen. It's going to change, but we're going to financially going to be behind as an economy by not taking it, by being dumb.
Thank you. Anyone else? Comment? Okay, thank you. Anyone in the audience have a question? If so, make yourself known and we'll bring you a mic.
So do you think there's any chance of turning back the FDA? Of any of you? I don't know who to ask, but any of you. What are the chances and what do we do?
I guess I would say, as Milton Friedman said, it seems almost impossible to get rid of the. I mean, we would love to get rid of the FDA, but the one thing that would be good is if they could get rid of the issue of efficacy and focus on safety, which was their original mandate for the FDA. But it's very, very difficult. I mean, what government programs are ever turned back? We're turning into this society where we depend upon government, and I think it's going to be very, very hard. There's a huge number of people that work at the FDA. They can't even figure out fraud and abuse within the FDA. There's so many things that are wrong, and just by delaying and the process of trying to get drugs and devices through, it's criminal for people like you and many others. But I just don't feel confident that it's ever going to be repealed. I mean, if you look at PCORI under the Affordable Care Act, the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, we're moving more and more into control. Comparative effectiveness. Is this drug may be medically effective for you, but if it's not cost effective, you're not going to have access to it. That was Don Berwick, when he was with the NHS. He thinks it's a global treasure. He was the acting administrator of CMNS. He believes that we can cut drug costs by telling people, depending on your age and your actuarial value of your life, if you're a senior and they determine your life is worth $55,000, you need a drug like Avastin that costs $90,000. It may be medically effective, but it's not cost effective. And so all of these things, we keep moving more and more, and it's very concerning to me.
I think that it's hard to be optimistic about getting rid of the FDA, but I think we have to try. I think there's a cultural problem in Americans. They've come to depend upon the government. I would even question the necessity of having the FDA regulate safety. I mean, if you're about to die of cancer, why should you not be allowed to choose a risky treatment? Look, the government cannot protect us against the facts of life. And the facts of life include that we are going to get sick and we're going to die, and that drugs are all risky. You can even say that they are all unsafe. And another big risk is that all very powerful agencies become corrupt. And it seems as though the regulator exists for the benefit of the regulated companies, or is captured by the regulated companies, and is more concerned about stomping out their competition than it is about protecting Americans. And Americans need to stop trusting them.
I'd like to add to Dr. Orion's point about the safety issue. I mean, I think part of what needs to be done is to really spell out the nature for people about what the FDA actually does. So most people think, well, the FDA makes us safer. Now, I think that is not at all what the FDA does. And if you look at the history of the FDA, you can see this. I mean, the drug that brought about the effectiveness requirement in the 60s, this was thalidomide. In the late 50s, it was released by a German manufacturer, and it caused birth defects. The FDA was looking into thalidomide. They had no clue. There's every reason to believe they had no idea this is what it was going to cause. They may have approved it, and they didn't because the fetal defects started showing up, and so of course they didn't, and they took the credit. But they didn't know. If you look at Vioxx was approved by the FDA. Then, yeah, there are some side effects that came up once it really hit the mass market. So I don't think that the FDA does make us safer. And I agree with Dr. Orient. All drugs are potentially unsafe. I mean, it depends on what you're using it for. Depends on. I mean, these are not easy issues. But what the FDA is doing is it's saying that you can't take certain risks. That's what it's saying. It's deciding that this risk is okay for people to take, this risk is not okay for people to take. So if you are terminal and you are willing to take more risks than the average person, now you have to go and you have to beg for the government's permission. Now, that is not the kind of system that people should want to live in. They should want to be able to make those sorts of decisions for themselves. How much risk am I willing to take? There could be times when there are unknown side effects, but you're still willing to take those risks. That kind of view of what the FDA does, I think, is really critical in getting people to see, yeah, maybe we shouldn't have this bureaucracy.
I don't think you should have to be terminal. One patient that I know of who had severe arthritis was really confined to her chair by pain. Vioxx helped her. She could get up and move around and function when she was taking Vioxx. He said, please give me my Vioxx back. I don't care if my risk of a heart attack is 5% instead of 2%. I want to be able to move.
Thank you. Just one thought. The basic answer is it will be easier than turning back the tide, but it will take a revolution in people's ideas of what their rights are, of what the proper role of government is, how government should be constrained, not just in healthcare. It's pretty conspicuous when the government takes control of your body, but they long ago took control of what your children are taught in school. And that has to be reversed as well. So it'll be tough. So we've got to fight, in my view, a big battle, not just a healthcare battle, to get back to basics and individual rights in government. Yes, sir.
So this event is, well, first off, that was basically my question there. But so this is FDA versus patients. I think you all have, the panels laid out a very good argument for why the data or statistics say that patients should win this battle. But let's look at creating the game plan for how the patients do win. How do we take this forward? Do we take little bites away and use stem cells as our attack point, or do we just go with a basic attack on that the FDA is bad and not pushing for safety? How do patients take this? How do we as the public take this and win this fight against the FDA?
There is one item on which the courts seem to be somewhat favorable to litigants, and that is First Amendment rights. And I think that the right of companies or physicians to communicate information about off-label uses or about stem cells might be a good way to start the attack.
On behalf of the Patients for Stem Cells, we can't boil the ocean. I mean, most of the members of Patients for Stem Cells have been patients who got the rug pulled out from under them. Some of them had their fat or their bone marrow stem cells extracted, stored, processed, and ready to get, and had been scheduled to get them back, and had to go out of the country to go get them. And some of them couldn't afford that. So some of them have been waiting over a year. And so that battle mean, I think there's one doctor, Dr. Nocera, Roger Nocera wrote a book called Healing Cells. And I quoted one of his comments earlier in my presentation. But what he basically has said is that this is the third biggest thing that's happened in medicine. The first thing was immunization. We discovered that and we saved more lives than ever lost in war. Next was antibiotics, penicillin. Learning how the body actually heals through your own stem cells is the third big revolution. So when the FDA gets out of the way and lets physicians just start cataloging how this repairs different disease groups, it's going to change the whole paradigm of medicine. So that as I was saying before, our focus is going to be very narrow. It's on the stem cells. So we believe that we're riding a tidal wave, though. That's going to change the whole equation.
Okay, tactically, we can cast light on as many outrages that any rational person would see as an outrage in venues like this, in letters to editors, in every chance we get to speak on it. Yes.
I would like to offer another answer to the question of what we can do. I don't know if you've ever listened to Mark Levin on talk radio. He's written a book called The Liberty Amendments, where he proposes that it's essentially a broad attack, where he proposes that the state governments get together to propose constitutional amendments to our Constitution that would change the way our legislators work. For example, it would, and this can be done. It can be done according to our existing Constitution. But we need to get rid of, for example, career politicians because they become corrupt, just like organizations do. So once we start putting term limits on the politicians, then the politicians start working for us rather than other entities. Another one of his amendments suggests that all federal agencies self-terminate after a period of, say, 3 years, unless they're re-upped, for example, by our legislators. So if the FDA were to, by law, disintegrate after 3 years, unless they do what the people want them to do, then that would be a real good solution that I would vote for. So I know that's a big plan and it would take a long time, but that might be the best option and the most effective option to just completely redo our government. So anyway, Liberty Amendments by Mark Levin outlines the plan.
Well, certainly the least effective method is just to sit back and take it. You can argue about various tactical approaches to take, but you've got to take some. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. I'd be interested in whether the panel can elucidate on the opinions and sentiments of other international bodies engaged in matters such as our own FDA versus our FDA. What does the World Health Organization think of how the FDA is operating? What does the Committee on Safety of Medicine think about how our FDA is operating? Do they have any pointers that they can give us that we can take and we can criticize the FDA based on the opinion of the bodies outside the United States?
I don't know that specifically, but I wouldn't have too much confidence in that because there is this idea of the Codex Alimentarius, the World Health Organization, and many European countries and others want to clamp controls on all kinds of vitamins and nutritional supplements, and they'll be much more restrictive than the United States is, at least in those regards, although many European countries or others do manage to approve drugs more efficiently than we do.
And John Graham, who was with PRI for a number of years, he's a senior fellow, he did a study comparing the FDA to what's happening in Europe. And it is easier to get approval in Europe. And if one country in the common market approves a drug, then it works in other countries. So you might look on Pacific Research Institute website under healthcare and see that. I will say that in Canada, when drugs have been approved by the FDA here, and then they go to Canada to the therapeutic Practices Board or whatever it's called, then they have to be reapproved, and it takes a lot longer in Canada to get a drug through. But of course, all of this has to do with price controls and the fact, that it's a system where the government is running it, all the healthcare system. So it's even worse there. The delays are even greater than in America.
I think you have to be selective. A minor thing, I used to buy cyclamates in Germany, go into a German pharmacy, artificial sweetener, which for some reason did not cause cancer in Germany. So I always stocked up when I went there. And, other sweeteners weren't available in the States. You had saccharin was about the optimal choice. And so I think there's selective cases in some European countries, probably the most, and Japan maybe is a little fewer. I don't know. But otherwise, the international organizations, I think, would be the worst. I don't know if they still do this, but when you land in New Zealand, when you're going there, they can't open the doors until they fumigate the plane to kill all of the obnoxious insects from the United States from coming into New Zealand. Now, New Zealand has got flies the size of an F-15. And so I don't know why they were gassing us. But they said this, everyone was choking in handkerchiefs on their face from this vicious insecticide. They said, this is approved by the World Health Organization. And this is all right then. I don't care that I can't breathe. So.
They used to do that in Australia, but when I went a couple of years ago, they didn't do it anymore. But I remember 10, 15 years ago, they'd come on with these sprayers, and everybody was like, but
Yeah.
they're not doing it. So I don't know whether they're doing it in New Zealand or not, but they quit in Australia.
So
I think they
generally-
might have become a little bit better. In 2010, when I was in New Zealand, they did it when everyone was asleep.
So at least you can pass away quietly.
Yeah.
Okay. But I think it's normally the more layers of government you add in structure and internationalization normally doesn't make it better. And we have another question.
I'm sure you guys have all heard in the news recently, a website called Silk Road was recently shut down by the feds, and this just kind of popped in my head. But what do you guys think about the kind of new generation of kind of civil disobedience type of mode of operation where these new software companies are coming up with new ideas and they're putting out kind of extra legal undercutting, instead of trying to fix the government, let's just go around it and break it a little bit. Do you think there's any possibility of doing things like that? You talked about these compound manufacturers. They're kind of like small mom and pop types of places. And doing that overseas and effectively smuggling in pharmaceuticals, is that something that would have the possibility of putting pressure on our government to finally change?
It's funny. I see a number of different software companies popping up which are doing things much better than, say, local regional governments were doing, that they're disintermediating or making things like they offer an outsourced cloud-based road management system that everybody can sign up to. It's harder to come up with, I can't, I'm having a hard time applying it to the stem cell. As a entrepreneur, I'm always thinking of, are there ideas that could help this? And I'm not sure there's a software answer to changing the way things are. When I was thinking earlier about what are some of the things that will change the world, it's going to be something that the FDA is not going to fix itself. They're not going to put in regulation that's change it. How it's going to happen is by people getting outraged. And I'm not a good poster child. I'm a rich CEO. So my sickness is, there's probably as many people going, good, he deserved it. So if there are young children, that there are going to be great poster children that are getting hurt from this. And we have to get outraged by whether it's a child or somebody that somebody loves is a better poster child, and those will emerge. I know that's what's going to happen in this stem cell, and I'm aware of specific cases of where people are being denied, and those just need better PR. And I think it will happen. People will get outraged when they really realize what's happening in the rest of the world and what's being denied them here. So it'll change, at least as it relates to cell medicine. And it has to happen. That's just where the world's going. The way we're just trying to slow it down here because we don't realize what's happening.
If the government forces us into a Wild West situation, we might have to go into it, but it will have a lot of risk. Okay, any more questions?
This question can start with Sally Pipes. I noticed in your handout talking about that Aetna has a subsidiary in West Virginia, not Aetna itself apparently, not operating under that name. And likewise, Blue Shield in California, what it has on the insurance exchange for the Obamacare is apparently different from what continues to be offered as individual plans. Does it appear as though these subsidiaries might be insulated from price problems that would affect the company as a whole, their non-exchange parts of their businesses, or that the fact that one side of the company won't have the financial problems that the other might have, might lead to demonstrating that showing a way out of the problems that Obamacare is bringing about?
Well, in West Virginia, I think there was one insurer in the exchange, and then, of course, in North Carolina, there are only 2. In California, there are 12 insurers who are going into the individual exchange. It's very interesting. Aetna, Cigna, and United decided not to even to compete to get into the exchange. And Aetna and United announced a few months ago that they weren't going to even be in the individual market in California. But the individual market will still be there, and it's going to be interesting to compare prices, because when you look at the Blue Shield Silver plan in the exchange under Covered California, people who sign up for that are only going to have access to 53% of the doctors that they would have access to under a Blue Shield individual plan, and only 78% of hospitals. So the UC hospitals, Cedars-Sinai, are not going to be available in the under Covered California in the Blue Shield Silver plan. So there's all kinds of things going on. I just think with the essential benefit plan that the Obamacare outlines that an insurance company has to provide is leading to much increased cost, and the average in the whole country for the bronze plan, which is the lowest plan, is $328. In California, a healthy young man under age 40 would have to pay $233 to buy the Blue Shield Silver plan versus the $94 he's paying right now. So 99% of the states are going to have plans in the exchanges that are more expensive than what people are paying in the individual market today.
Okay, one more chance for a question from anyone? Thank you. I want to thank this brave group of FDA pioneers. I think you'll see there's a lot of work to be done. It will require imagination and ingenuity. I'd like to thank all the people watching on the live stream to the video. And this entire meeting will be archived on the site you're watching it on. And will also soon be on the AFCAM website and the APPS website and many of the organizations here. I would like, again, to thank the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, the Ayn Rand Institute, Patients for Stem Cells, and the Pacific Research Institute for participating in this meeting. Thank you and good night.